Dear Mr. X, it's me, Annabelle. As we discussed before, I wanted to tell you about what happened to me when I was younger. I was about 10 years old, living in the Northeast. One afternoon, I was walking home from school when I saw a man up the road ahead of me. He was cutting across the street, walking toward the sidewalk on my side. My mind was sort of wandering in space, so I barely took notice of him. He had a slight limp, which made him stand out from the background of my daydreaming. I kept walking. His path began to converge with mine. I didn't react. I didn't see the cloth bag in his hand until he was right next to me, throwing it over my head. I felt the bag cinch around my neck with a strong jerk as he swept me off my feet. Within seconds, he had thrown me into the back of a van and was driving down the road as if nothing happened. My body immediately began to ache from the trauma of being tossed around like a rag doll and left unsecured on the cold, rigid metal floor of a moving vehicle. Stunned by the sudden attack, it was several minutes before I began crying as the realization set in. I was being kidnapped, and I was not going to see my family again. Screams erupted uncontrollably from the pit of my gut, and I felt my chest crushing in at the thought. Not long after my fit of crying started, I felt the gravity shift under me as the van pulled over onto what sounded like the shoulder of a highway. The man got up from his seat, pulled up the hood on my head, and shoved a rag into my mouth before slamming the door and getting back on his way. I thought he would never stop driving. It felt like days went by as we traveled on. Burning sensations raced through my joints and bones as they pressed against the paddled floor of the van. When we finally stopped, I could hear voices chattering, muffled by the thin walls of the vehicle. I was held in a normal-looking house a couple of 100 miles away from my home. After a few weeks, I learned what I had to do to survive. I won't get too far into the details, but for several months, I was tortured and abused. Physically, emotionally, and, well, you can assume what else. Everything I did was closely monitored. Eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom, everything. It wasn't long before that became my life. My kidnapper was a fixed, permanent character in my story, the man with the limp. He was bald-headed and with heavy scarring on his scalp and face, as if he had been in a lot of bad fights. He had one green eye and one blue. Whenever he wore a short-sleeved shirt, a tattoo was visible on his forearm, stylized, cursive font that spelled out my name, Annabelle. My middle and last names were inscribed on his skin as well. Every time I saw it, I felt sick to my stomach. By avoiding making him mad or stepping out of line, I eventually gained enough of his trust to be allowed to walk around the house and get food when I was hungry without him watching my every move. The tense air of the mutual distrust that dominated the first few months seemed to fade into a twisted feeling of normalcy. One day, he showed me his room. There were pictures of me all over the walls, many from my time being held as his captive, but also, scattered among them were photos taken before I was kidnapped. He had pictures of me walking outside, pictures of me sleeping in my room. It took every fiber of my will to avoid breaking down in front of him as the rush of memories of my former life came crashing down. I wanted to go home so badly, but I couldn't let him know that, especially when he was beginning to open up and trust me. Thank goodness I was smart enough to understand that. A few weeks later, I was able to convince him to take me shopping with him. The one condition was that I would have to hold his hand the entire time. While we were at a grocery store, he had to go to the bathroom. He made me promise to stay put while he went inside. I had to focus extra hard to conceal the look of amazement and anticipation that lay just beneath my neutral expression. I could barely believe he was willing to trust me enough to leave me alone, even for a minute. I knew an opportunity was about to present itself. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran. Frantically searching the aisles, my spirit began to fade when I noticed there appeared to be no other customers roaming the store. When I finally cut a corner and found a lone woman shopping, I grabbed her by the waist and told her I had been kidnapped, begging her to call the police. She walked me outside while she made the call on her phone. I could see that she believed me right away, probably due to the desperation in my eyes. To my amazement, the police arrived and were waiting for him by the time he was done in the restroom. It wasn't long before he was arrested in the back of a squad car. I told them my address and they eventually had someone take me home. The officers that drove me home told me that the man's name was Lucas. I told them that I had never seen him before that day he took me away. Little did I know, he had been watching me for 2 years. It took me a while to get past the whole ordeal, but just so you know, I'm fine now, just a little paranoid. Now, about the story I originally wanted to tell you, it's directly related to all of this. And by the way, I'm sorry if this is dragging on a bit. About a year or so had passed since I had returned home. I was 12, back in my routine life out in the country where my parents and I lived. My best friend Beth was staying with us due to some family issues, so she and I walked everywhere together. I was usually barefoot, keeping a sharp eye out for snakes or broken glass along the dirt roads. One day, my mom let us walk to the nearest gas station to get ice and pop for a cookout we were planning. Mind you, the station was only about 50 yards away from my house, so it was basically within earshot of my backyard. When we got close to the store, Beth grabbed my hand and whispered to me, "Walk faster." I figured she was just getting tired of being out in the hot sun, so I picked up the pace. We walked around the store for a few minutes, looking at ice cream and energy drinks. Standard behavior for a couple of rebel kids. We got everything we needed for the barbecue, plus a couple of extra push pops for ourselves. As we made our way back home, Beth grabs my hand again, this time shaking with fear written all over her face. She's only 10 years old, by the way. Just then, I looked up and over my shoulder to see a man walking briskly behind us, but quite a ways down the road. Even though it didn't seem like much, my mind went into overdrive, calculating what to do amid flashes of my recent, horrible past. I told Beth to get my phone out and text my mom and let her know what was happening. I pulled a knife out of my back pocket and held it out to my side, making sure the man saw it. He slowed his pace once the blade came out. Once he backed off, I told Beth not to bother with the text, as we were almost home. When we arrived, the cookout went as normal. We helped prepare the food and ate with family, eventually forgetting about the brief scare we had. We even changed into our swimming clothes and splashed around in the creek afterward. After about an hour of playing around in the water, I felt a sharp tug on my shirt. Beth pulled me close to her, pointing up to the nearby bridge. "Sissy, the man is back." I looked up at the bridge and felt my lungs expand to the point of strain as I gasped in horror. I recognized the man as the same one who had kidnapped me before. I scooped Beth up and we ran home, hand in hand. She kept asking me who the man was, and not having the heart to tell her the whole truth, I simply said I didn't trust him. I don't for the life of me know why I didn't call the police right then and there. When we got home, a sense of safety came over me and I immediately felt I could relax. Within the hour, we were in my room watching a movie. The phone rang and I answered it. A familiar voice responded.
"You're my baby doll. You belong to me. Don't run from me, girl. You can't hide from me. Remember, you're going to be my wife."
I hung up the phone. My heart was in my throat. I threw the phone into my laundry basket, screaming at him. Beth asked if I was okay, and I just told her it was an old friend being an ass. I walked downstairs to make sure the doors and windows were all locked. I eventually went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I was startled awake by the sound of my front door being busted open, followed by several voices yelling, "Police!" I heard their heavy footsteps running all throughout my house until they finally made it to my bedroom. They checked all over the room, in the closets, behind my door, and they ended up pulling the man out from under my bed. Lucas's bright eyes glared at me from amidst the swarm of officers wrestling him into submission. It was one of the most traumatic moments of my life, and the feeling of being watched has never completely left me. I've wanted to tell this story for so long, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Thanks for helping me share this story. I hope this can help someone avoid going through what happened to me. Yours truly, Annabelle.
Greetings, my friends. Thanks so much, first of all, to my new friend, Margbot, for lending her voice and talents to this video. If it weren't for her performance, I wouldn't have honestly had time to release a video this week. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out her channel. Subscribe if you like what you hear. I suspect you will. You might be hearing my voice over there sometime soon as well, as she has a series of interviews she does with other YouTubers. Anyway, I wanted to say that many of the stories that we talk about here on this channel are about monsters of the mysterious kind. creatures of the night that stalk human victims with otherworldly perspective. However, every so often, I get in my inbox a story of the most disturbing variety, the human monster. Someone so vile that I struggle to understand their actions and motivations. How someone could be so invested in their own experience of life as they see it, that they would damage or even ruin, or even worse, snuff out the chance at happiness held within the heart of another person. In my humble opinion, unfortunate as it may be, there are some people who simply should not be here. The abductor in this story is one of them. I want you to know that, given the way I received this and other similar stories, there were some thematic details that I had to add or subtract, certain things to flesh out the story properly. I do this in order to protect the identities of the innocent parties involved. I don't want anyone being able to easily gain information as to the whereabouts or specific details of the events portrayed. I don't want any real-world consequences to come from me making videos like this, as I'm sure you understand. But I do try to preserve the narrative so that it can be used as an example for people to learn from. On top of that, I didn't want to push for any extra information from Annabelle. I could tell that my little YouTube video was not worth dragging up any more memories than she already was kind enough to trudge through in order to share the elements of this story. I assure you, though, that the vast majority of the story is directly inspired by her harrowing account of the actual events. So with that said, there's a lesson to be learned today. I want to stress the importance of being aware of your surroundings, being careful not to zone out when you're out in public especially. Think about what she had to go through. I'm sure Annabelle would agree that there were several moments in this story where, if she could just turn back the hands of time, she would have done a few things differently. Still, I'm very proud of her courage and the many decisive actions she did take, as well as her bravery in the act of sharing this story with us. Every day as I go to work, I see children walking along busy streets or standing at bus stops, staring at their phones. And not just children really, adults as well. I hope that if you know or have a child that does things like that, be it at school, the mall, movies, or anywhere else, I really hope that you'll do them a favor by pointing out the dangers of being dialed into such a narrow area of focus, the dangers that can be approaching in their environment and are totally avoidable. I really hate hearing about things like that happening. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. Stay safe out there, my friends. I'm Mr. X, and may your nights be full of dreams. By the way, that creepy kidnapper guy, he sure was a waste of human life, wasn't he? Today's code word is waste. Work that into a comment down below. Take care, my dear friends. I'm out.